to the third session of what is called the Asmaa program, where this is a series that addresses, chooses, and we have chosen a word, a series about words that are associated with the document of human fraternity or Abrahamic family house. We began with dignity. We began with dignity and with grace. And I'll tell you a little about them. And now we have this third one, which is on house. And dignity and grace were both kind of more conceptual, vague, if you like, notion, like what is dignity and what is grace, intangible concepts and values that we have inherited. But house, we are moving into something that is more physical, is more structural, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I do want to say something because I think this is a completely new group that we have here. I want to say something about kind of what brings all these words together, what's really behind these texts. Dignity is a term that is central to the document of human fraternity. It's a document that we will see in the forum of Abrahamic Family House that is a kind of foundation of this institution, this project, this mission, this place. And it is the document really belongs to the series of documents, I think, or declarations that along the line of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And these human rights and these declarations really depend on this vague notion of this ineffable notion of human dignity, right? And those, original declarations, they assume that we all have dignity already. We don't know where it comes from, what it is we are born with, but since we have dignity, we have human rights, right? This is a very kind of a legal concept of human rights, comes from dignity. 75 years later, this dignity, it is evoked in the Declaration of Human Fraternity, but it is not assumed as something that is inherent to the individual. It really emerges through what is really beautiful and new and innovative about this document. It emerges through friendship, human relations. It's not something that we can take for granted. I have dignity, it's here, that I have it, and it's vulnerable. It is vulnerable, it emerges through social relations, and it's in need of affirmation and confirmation, okay? So that's something that was covered in the first time, and it was more historical and more philosophical. And in Greece, in the second term, it was another term that it has in all the both Greco-Roman and biblical and Abrahamic tradition, rahmat and grace has a place. It's very important, but it's both aesthetic grace, notion of lightness, but it's also social graces that are manners, and then theological notion of grace that is something that is God-given, that we talked about that. But at the end, we arrive again at the same notion that at the end, grace, it's something that is social. At the heart of it, it's something that is evokes generosity, God's grace. At the same time, it is gratitude. So at the same time, it's giving and gratitude, and passing this beautiful Greek first, the three graces really capture the image of what grace is. It is a circle, it's a social circle. And so we a little bit talked also about the fact that these are a set of values that are different from, they're coded differently from the kind of values that we have inherited since the 17th century at least, that are based on market values, of exchange values, right? It's a kind of a different kinds of, generosity and gratitude leads to different set of behaviors or incentives, if you like, right, than the other one. So now, with house today, we it's like a little bit of a shift. It's the most familiar, almost banal, mundane, familiar word, house. It's almost the first drawing of children. Everybody knows what a house is. And yet, it's the concept that has profound, both theological, psychological, philosophical meaning for us, right? These are some of the, and the meanings are almost infinite. It's numerous. So we'll talk about the few things that we will concentrate, focus on. But I want to actually say a few words about it, before we go on. So it is familiar, but it's also very deep at the same time. Right? We think we know it, but then when we talk about things that we don't know, we want to know more. It also has organizes our first conceptions of time and place, private and public, self and other, safe and unsafe, the stranger and familiar, inside and outside. Idea of family and familiar, really important. That's a house organizes that for us. The foreign, walls, limits, entries, safety and vulnerability, and the very idea of, I would say, difference itself, right? There is a house really organizes the idea of all of these things are differences, but fundamental differences for us that make us who we are. Houses are also our structure, our dreams. You have heard of the memory palace, so we all know that memories need to be housed, right? Memories don't just exist, right? But they structure our dreams as children. We dream of attics and corridors and the windows, and right, these are like emotions are really attached to these places. And as adults, we return to our first homes in our dreams. Well, it actually makes me emotional this one, sorry. So we imagine our ideal homes also as adults. We imagine them, we plan them, we imagine the inhabitants of them. And these dreams become real when we build them, we have events in them, we have guests in them, and really a new life is born in houses. I'm going to come back to, I do want to say something about the place of dreams, the ways in which houses really do structure our dreams, because we do come back to our first homes. And in our dreams, and many, many people cannot go back to those first homes. So, what we will do today, the approach is always this for us. Like, it is etymological, we do some conceptual history, some etymology, and then I will give some examples that give three notions of house for us. House as a dwelling, as a place of dwelling, actually. Living, dwelling, residence. House as a family genealogy, right? The house of Tudor, the house of Saud, the house of Ahyan, the house of course, Abraham. And so family genealogy. And the third one is a house is a poetic one, but in many, many languages, both Persian and also Arabic, bait, the word for house, is a measure of poetry. It's a couplet, it's two lines of poetry, make a house. So this, is a bait of poetry, right? And in Arabic and Persians also know that. So this also, it's not only, for Persians and Arabs, it's very intuitive that a bait will connect us, like a language becomes the house of something else, some being, some existential, it has some existential component, right? For us, because a word is a house, right? Two lines of poetry. But we will also talk about that. the question of representation and language, right? And poetry as a house of being, right? So we will talk about that. So these are the three things that we will talk about. So let's get on with it. With etymologies, I like these kind of three. There's like with the house, it comes with the Germanic, like Proto-Germanic house is really does have the notion of coziness, a structure, a building, right? The Greek oikos, like economia, comes from oikos. Actually, it has a notion. It is really means a household. We have inherited these words, right? Oikos is really a household. So it's not only a house, but a house also has the word household, the connotation of household in there. Like, you know, the house of the olive, you know, the family of Abraham, right? The Abraham family house. So that kind of the household is already also in the idea of the house. And then we have the alphabet itself, right? The representation of house that becomes really something that I will begin with. Linguistically, or in terms of alphabet and representation and etymology, the earliest representation, right? The script, the script, because it's hieroglyphs, representation of house is an Egyptian hieroglyph that is right here on the right side. And this here, it is very interesting. And all of these I want to talk about space, time, and orientation. It's very interesting because this really is a blueprint or a footprint, right? And the orientation of what it brings attention is to the inside and outside, right? As an entryway. So it's a footprint, okay? The next one that we see is, which is derived, they're all derived, there's all influences. Actually, all the Aramaic, even the Proto-Semitic, and also Germanic words for house, they go back to the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And this is very, very unusual, actually. It's very unusual because these are really different etymologies. Please come in. Please come in. So this is a Southern Arabian script, the second one. And you will see that it's very interesting, the orientation changes, right? What you see now is it becomes, of course, the walls and a roof, right? So rather than inside and outside, this has a feel, a connotation of shelter, right? Because it's also, a house is also a shelter. It's the first notion of a house we will see historically in Adam is the search of a shelter, right? Rather than inside and outside, by protection. The next two that I've chosen to talk about is, of course, the Arabic bet and the Hebrew bet. And it's not, the one does not come before the other, but I've chosen to represent it here just for the sake of presentation, because the bet, the Aleph bet of Arabic, you see the orientation changes and it becomes literally kind of a vessel, if you like, or an ark, right? If you want, we'll talk about the ark of Noah, right? As a house. It becomes, and with the opening, it becomes a vessel. A house is also a vessel, right? It's also a vessel, if you like, right? The orientation is upwards. And the Hebrew bet is it's very important actually because it is the first letter of the Old Testament or the Torah or the Hebrew Bible. We call it the Hebrew Bible. Thank you all for the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible. That is really important because the Hebrew Bible, the Genesis, the beginning, the first kind of beginning of history begins with the letter bet. Begins with what is called house. By the way, I should have actually mentioned that bet, like bait, and bet means house. That's really the point, the point that I'm making. So the alphabet itself is the name, please, name for house itself. So the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, begins with house, and that's really significant. This is what I really need to talk about. Because the orientation, I already want to allude to this, the orientation of this letter that begins from right to left, it is closed on one side. The orientation is not upward or downward, right? This house goes from right to left and begins a narrative. It begins history. It begins history, if you want, terrestrial history, if you like, right? It is not directed upward or downward. So, house is something to do with also life on earth, if you like, right? It structures, it houses this word history, right? Or another way of saying it, what does, the question that I want to ask for me, the big question about house, if you have one question, is that what does a house do, right? What does a house do, actually? And as we see, house does many things. It shelters, serves as a vessel. In this way, what the house does is actually creates and makes history possible, or makes language possible, if you want, or makes being possible, okay? Now, I will allude to this here, and we will come back to this, and it will become less esoteric. And I want to say something. The other, dignity and grace, while being very vague, they're very concrete because we talk about them historically, how they were used. House is more poetic. I'm not going to do a history of houses and the history of how houses existed. You're not doing that here, right? It is a little more poetic and philosophical, and so this is really what we're going to do here. This is the word for Bereshit, the first word of the Hebrew Bible, right? And in the beginning, God created. And many people who are, they're scholars, and I'm not a scholar of the Bible at all, or Hebrew language at all, they have already noted that there is something very awkward in the syntax or the syntax or the grammar of this first sentence, right? Why does basically say, why should the Bible begin with this kind of syntax, with the Bereshit? And I want to leave it right here by just saying that, I will talk about this later maybe a little bit more, that by itself, the shape of a house is fundamental to creation. Creation, life, and history requires a house. It's fundamental to it, right? This is really important, okay? So, dwelling. The first notion of house as a dwelling. With the first, as we know, the first kind of the image of the first scene of creation, right, after the creation of Adam and Eve, is soon exiled from the garden of paradise or Eden. And of course, this is a scene that has been depicted as the most iconic scene. This is a moment of birth, the moment of birth of humanity. Not when God creates Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve are not quite human in paradise, right? They're not human in paradise. Why they're not human? Because they don't die. Human beings need to die. They need to become mortal, right? Mortality makes us human, right? There's this time some kind of an abstract place. With exile, when they are cast from this wonderful place, which is a garden, it's not a house, right? It's a garden, it's open air, kind of. Because there in Garden of Eden, you don't need shelter, you don't need walls, you don't need protection, you don't need inside and outside, you don't need safe and volatile. None of these things, they don't exist in the Garden of Eden. It is this moment of exile when we become human, and the need for shelter, another way of putting it, is that makes us human. Our humanity is defined for our needs. What is the first thing they're going to do? They're going to go look for shelter because now they need it. That's the first thing they do, right? And with this, of course, they set in motion history. History begins with this moment of running away, and now what? Look for a house. Look for a house, look for a shelter, look for food and gardening and all of those things. But then, this moment, of course, this exile, the original exile, has set in motion in all cultures, in all traditions, both biblical, Abrahamic, and non-Abrahamic, the desire to return home, to go back home, nostos, right? All these Greek, travelers, they go and they need to go back to Ithaca, Odysseus, and in Christianity, I think Father Stefano will join us a little later after Mass. Christianity is really about the journey or the desire, right, at any moment to what? To return to the origin, right? This is really about, and this is Christian eschatology with St. Augustine. I want to say something about the image that I have here, and this is a poem by Rumi. It's probably the most translated and the most familiar, the most universal poem. And this is a reed flute song. How many have you heard it? How many of you have heard it? And what it says is that it's a very famous one, and if I say maybe, it says that listen to the sound of the flute, reed flute. What is it saying? It says, since I was cut off from the riverbed, I've been making this sound. Anyone who's been cut off from the source wants to go back, right? These few lines, these two lines, بشنو از نی چون حکایت می‌کند از جدایی ها شکایت می‌کند, is the most, like Rumi became very famous. Rumi is the most famous and universal poet, right, of all times, because of these two lines. What is it? Of the language and what makes us speak at all is our desire to unite back to our origin. Something like to go back home, actually. Like what am I saying? All I'm saying is I want to go back home, basically, right? The desire to, okay. How's the second notion, right? I'm going to go quickly through these three notions, right? And then we will have a conversation. The second notion of house as family genealogy, right? Why do families need houses like that? The house, where does it actually come from, right? Relations, social relations, family relations, and this kind of genealogies actually need to be visualized somehow, right? And this problem of visualizing genealogies and families has been something that philosophers and scribes have been dealing with for a long time. Like, how do you actually represent your family and the connections? So we have had family trees mostly. This is like the way that we're familiar, you're in boxes, and of course scrolls, pages that they're different, but they have different connotations, and I like to talk about that. There's also universal history. So the family can be very small, it can be very big, or it can be the universal history. And these universal histories, and this is something that I want to spend a little time with, house as family genealogy and as a universal history, is, and I brought a copy that I'm going to show you how these universal histories work. So, beginning in the 13th century, rulers, mostly rulers, who were trying, rulers or aristocratic families, but mostly rulers, who were trying to position and situate themselves and their own house and their own person in universal history, actually. Like, where do I really belong in this vast cosmos or the history? And what they would do is to create a universal history. Oh, this is not clear enough. It's not clear enough. That would begin with Adam. This is Adam. Okay? And this is a biblical history from creation. And it goes down all the way. I'm sorry, we cannot read this here. This is Noah. This is Noah. Okay? And it goes down. From Noah, you come to Abraham. Okay? So you come all the way to Abraham. And then, of course, we have Isaac, Ishaq, and Ismail. Okay? So this goes down all the way, and of course, the universal history. So they would create, and this is what I'm going to show you, is a universal history that was written for Sultan Suleiman. And the reason I want to show you, because I want to make a point about it, right? So this is a universal history that, I like this even better. Because universal history starts with now, the now of Sultan Suleiman, right? This is universal history. It could have been the other way around. It could have started with Adam. And that's actually really beautiful because it makes my point that these scrolls, these universal histories, are represented in such a way that you can begin with now or you can begin with Adam, with creation, depending on which way you roll it. Okay? So, this one, and this is it's not exact replica because the original is much, much longer. It's actually 7 meters, right? Let's see whether we can do this. It should be 7 meters, the original. Yeah? And that's only Sultan Suleiman, the 1600. Right? Let's see if I can. This way. Okay. So you can see at the point that universal history, so this is the house of Adam, if you like. Right? This is the house of Adam. And of course it should be 7 meters long, this is a shorter version. It goes from Adam's to Sultan Suleiman. And why would Sultan Suleiman, let's say the 16th century, right? Why would rulers, why would people want to put themselves in this house in this way? What does it actually do, right? It gives you a place in history, right? A place in history connects you to the origins, and that's really quite important. Now, what is the advantage of having this kind of really awkward scroll rather than a page, a book? You can present it in different ways. What does actually the form of a scroll do that a page or the other images that we saw don't do? Let me this here. Okay? What it does is that scroll houses history in a very different way. It houses history in a different way. And what it does is that when this is the original scroll, okay, this one, this one, is parchment. It's not this cheap, this cheap paper. It's actually parchment. When you really roll it really, really tight, the original one, it becomes about 4 inches, right, thick. And what you have now is a three-dimensional object. History becomes a three-dimensional object with a center that has either Adam, the founder, the first man, the seed of history, inside it, right? Or whoever ruler or whoever it is, really, you or the now inside it, right? And this kind of representing or a scroll, right, has, as you can see, theological implications. Does that make sense? Because, in fact, this history is a construct, is a fabrication. Time, really, theologically, time, human time is only human time. It really doesn't exist, right? It is not, time is not some linear, begins here, linear and goes from here to there. It's just a construct, right? It's a way of us representing it. It's a way of housing it. How can we house history in a way that is more conducive to better relations, to better values, to better theology, to more correct theology, closer to the truth of time and reality? Does that make sense? So the scroll, right? They thought it actually represents it more clearly because it has the origin of time right there, there, right? You see it right there. It's not some way back when. It's right there all the time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, of course, this thing itself, as you see, scrolls need what? Houses too. Right? Have an image of it? Yeah, this is the image of it, right? Mm-hmm. Originally, they also made a box for it, right? Because scrolls need homes. And I think I'm going to ask the rabbi eventually why we do have the Abrahamic family house rabbi here. Because, why did the original commandments need an ark, a chest, right? That's the first notion of a chest is a house, right, actually. Why did the original command need a chest? Why did God actually give exact measurements of how to build? Why is it so important to get instructions about how you house a commandment with the stone or a scroll? And still, Torah scrolls have to be housed, right? What is the purpose of that? Housing the scroll. Protection.
First and foremost.
Yes, protection, but I want to also add that yes, protection, that's the first thing. But it's also want to add the fact that it brings attention to the fact that it is housed, right? And it's not willy-nilly. Otherwise, God wouldn't spend all this time and say, make it exactly in this way, right? Make it exactly, why does it have to be exactly in this way? Like the architecture of it becomes really important, right? Symbolically it becomes important. Otherwise, you say make a really, really hard, sturdy protection. So, the third notion that I want to just allude to is something that I did allude to earlier with the thank you very much. With language as a house that of being and the importance of language as a house. The other day, 2 days ago, we had Father Stefano speak about the document of human fraternity and what are the novelties of what is so new about, what is like the novel aspects of this document. And there are 4 or 5 that he mentioned, and the last 2 were very interesting for me and relevant for us here, was that somehow the writers of this document, which is His Holiness the Pope and the Imam Azhar, they wrote something together. They signed it for the first time. This is what Father Stefan mentioned. But also he said that people who know this document well, they talked about this strange language of it, right? That it was new, that this is really, why did the grammar and the words, there is something strange about it, something new. And so we talked about the fact that and Father Stephanus said that it was written in such a way that both the Muslims and Christian could read their own perspective and theology in it. They could recognize themselves in it. And that was really interesting. And so the language, right, could not be used. The language could not be what has been used before. That's really the point. A new language had to be created to do something new. If you just have some idea and you use the same old language, it won't create the same effect. And that's really somehow what we're talking about, that language itself is a house of being. With a new language, you create new life. And if you want to create new life, or new vision, or something about the future, even if you're commemorating 800th anniversary of the meeting of St. Francis with the Sultan of Egypt, right? Even if you're commemorating past events, right? You have to renovate it. You have to create a new language, right? So language is what pushes through. I want to close this little really interlude, and then we will get into our own kind of conversation with some images of all the houses that I could have chosen for us really to discuss, to discuss today, to bring what I call not the Ark of Noah, but I call the boathouse of Noah, is very relevant to me, and I think to at this moment in history, at this moment to the life in UAE. This is really kind of my reading, right? Because first of all, the Ark, it was not a boat, just like a boat, right? It really was a house. That's another thing. That's another moment where God gives instructions of how to create I think I have a text, right? Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. It's kind of like a covering, right? So he gives really specific instructions about how to make rooms with it, how to make coverings in it, and so on, compartments in it. And so this floating house, right? Because it's also not a ship that starts going from here to there. When we say a ship or an ark, a boat, usually you have to get in it, you go from somewhere to somewhere. This is just not one of those things, right? It's just that you make a house, you go in it, and make sure that it floats, because there's going to be a lot of water very soon. That's really the point, like a floating house for a while, right? And so Noah is in there with his household and with, animals from two of every species. And after a while, he sends, what is the first bird that he sends out? Not a vulture, right?
Raven.
A raven, yes, a crow. Yes, the first one he sends out is a raven, who's looking for maybe, corpses, and then nothing happens. And then he sends a dove. The dove eventually comes back. I'm not going to give you, so eventually comes back, with an olive branch saying that, land is there. I've come, land, And then departs again, doesn't come back. So we know, Noah knows there is land. The ship has landed, the boat has landed. Noah doesn't get off the boat for 1 week, and that for me is very interesting, right? Why doesn't he get off the boat? There's land. What's he doing for 1 week there? Until God tells him, evicts him. Actually, there's an eviction notice that he gets, get off the boat, get off, it's finished. You have to get out. This is for me, it's like a poignant moment, right? First of all, how quickly we get attached to prisons, how quickly we get attached to whatever abode that it is, this floating house, right? And that is human. That's human nature. And how difficult it is to get off the boat and start building a new house. It is not get off and build a house. It's not a given. It's not easy. It's not, yes, a house here and a house there, Aldar. Aldar, I love the word Aldar, which is really the word for houses. Aldar does it very easily, actually see that. But it's not an easy thing. It is like a whole, to get off in a new land and build a house. And then, as we said, it becomes a house when he goes in there. First of all, he plants the vineyard, and then he goes in there with his household. And there comes the universal history that we just saw. Right, in 7-meter long scroll. Right? Eventually, he divides the land, and this is this discussion we had 2 days ago. He divides the land between his. Actually, I like this. This is a print. It's a 16th century print of a 4th century etymology of a book of, it's called Etymology, that goes the earliest depiction of geography according to Noah. Because what Noah does, that's the first geography that we have actually. And the names that he gives to his tribes are the names that are with us today, right? It's a very interesting thing. So he divides the world and he gives of his children, go build a house here and name it. He creates the first houses, the first genealogies right there and there, as you see in here. This is the Rembrandt is the boarding ark, and of course is very interesting, going there. I put the Raft of Medusa on the right because it's a very famous painting, and I just wanted to show that this is a very different thing. Yeah, the Ark of Noah is not a raft of survivors, right? It is an actual house and a home, right? It's not just survivors. And this is also very interesting. This is a Dutch, and it's actually a house in a boat. That's a Dutch painting. And so, yeah, maybe this is a very good image to end with. This is, of course, the rainbow, the ark. So it's also called, and I love this, the fact that it's a rainbow is an ark itself, right? So in fact, the boat, the ark, is reversed, and it becomes the promise, the covenant with humanity. The covenant with humanity is a reversed boat, and it creates what? A shelter. It creates the ark upside down. It becomes the covenant with humanity, always reminding you, of course, of the floating house, right? And becomes the I would say, what is it? Like the first notion of, or one of the first notions of a house, right? As a shelter and a covenant, a shelter as a house, as a covenant with God. And it would be a good place for me to end it here. Spoken for a while. And usually it's very nice we have actually a big group of people here, and usually what we do here is we do a little bit of a workshop, if you agree and you stay with us, is that I would like to ask you to take about 10 minutes and I'm going to write responses to a few questions that I have put here. And then we get into a circle and then we speak about it, right? It's okay if you have to go, it is fine. But I would like you to stay, and then usually the best part of these sessions is when we start talking to each other. So please take one of the notebooks that you have. Okay? There should be a notebook and a pen, please. And the questions that I asked here I've just given examples of what you might want to talk about, right? But the question is this. If English is not your first language, please translate the word house into your original, into your mother tongue. And think about the first experience of being in a house. The most, or when I say the first, it could be the most memorable, the one that is the most, make the most impression on you, the one that you have gone to in your dreams and other people were living in there, the houses that don't exist yet maybe, or your grandparents' home, what it is. And write, what is the connotation? What makes it a home? Or unhomely, if you want, right? And I put some questions here. What meanings do you attach to this notion of house? It could be a prison, or it could be safety. I don't know, right? But there are different meanings that I've got in there. You can also write about, if you don't want to talk about this first experience of the house, talk about hospitality, house and hospitality, because hospitality also is very much related to the notion of a house, right? Maybe if you cannot be, what makes a house is the ability to be hospitable, right? What makes a house is your ability to be hospitable. You cannot be hospitable, it's not even a house anymore. Right? You cannot have people in there and offer them something. It's something else, right? Maybe it's hospitality to make a house. Or if you want to write about the Earth as a home, or what are the challenges of this planetary thinking, the house, this universal, Adam as our origin, and then making the Earth, everybody talks about Earth is our home. What are the challenges of that kind of thinking? So now this is a little more intimate, and I've talked for a while. I would like to comment, question, respond, read first. I'm a teacher, so I do follow people.
Okay, I'm going to go first. I'm not necessarily choosing, so I'm not going to. It's wonderful, thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Really
Brilliant.
It made me think about my first memories of house, which, now I'm going to have to try and not get emotional about this, is my family home in London, in a place called Pinner. If anyone comes from, Pinner. Which is where I lived in from when I was 2 to when I was 18. And it is a place of, I sort of just wrote down some notes, it's like a place of intense safety, security, where I, had all of my formative years. And it's a place that both my parents, when they were both terminally ill at different points in time, both of them chose to die in that house. It was such an important place for us all in our lives, and it is, the place that I go back to in my dreams often. It's a huge part of my life, was and still is, even though I have not lived there for a very long time.
It's still in your family?
No.
Yes, please.
I just have my writing. So the first time that I encountered the word house was in primary school in London, when my teacher asked me to write a passage and draw a picture of my house and my family. I associated the word house with my family and drew all of the members of my family smiling outside in the front garden underneath the sun and clouds. I associated the word house with something that belongs to me and something that stands for the people I love and the place we have together.
I had something, so I remember my childhood home in Sicily from this very small village in in rural Scotland, and the houses are like hundreds of years old. And my sister, the house that I grew up in is no longer with my family. But my sister, she was scrolling on Instagram one day, and she came across a picture that a random photographer had taken of our house. And I mean, to most people it looks like an ugly picture because it's gloomy, like Scotland, it's cloudy all the time, rains all the time, and it's a rainy day. But it's this picture of our house, and she sent it to us. And then she sent, I think the photographer was selling the picture, so she bought me and my sisters this gloomy picture. There's like a dustbin outside the thing, and it's just like the most, and it's like in my home here. It's just the most, in a way, the most treasured picture. But she just completely randomly found in this room. And just said, I just saw this house in the middle of this old country lane, and I just thought I want to take a picture. And she took a picture, and then probably only 3 pictures she's ever sold of this photo is to my family because we really saw it. But yeah, it's just, and so we all have this picture of our house. I know we're all in different parts of the world, but yeah, it's just. So when you were saying there about that first picture, and this was maybe only 3 or 4 years ago that she came across.
So I want to ask about this notion of, intimacy, private, clearly. I mean, and we can go on, and all of us will have something that is like incredibly, a notion of sacred, cherished, existentially important connection. I don't know, not everywhere, I don't want to assume, right? I don't want to assume, maybe it's not true. But, and this notion, I want to ask you something about this idea is a little bit in a crisis right now, right? In the world right now, right? Very, very few people can go back to their, ancestral homes as they used to, right? Very few people can go to their parents' home, let alone the grandparents' home, right? And also our neighborhoods have changed. The people who have the neighborhoods, your neighbors don't look the way that you were, you're used to. And so, I don't want to ask a too difficult a question, right? But it's like, how do we deal with this issue, right, of protecting our house at the same time of not being overprotective of it, at the same time of being open, right, to all sorts of things, to moving, to migration, to immigrants, to ourselves moving around. Kind of maybe that's why I like this Noah's Ark a little bit. This floating boat, right? Kind of this floating boat that was a little bit temporary, right? And he was attached to it. I don't know. I just wanted to throw some. You don't have to respond to this. You can just say what you like.
Actually, it's linked to what I wrote. I wrote that for me the first meaning of house was the place where I grew up with my brother and family, and then we moved all together, and this was the new house. And then I moved from this house, but this was still for us the place where we called house. Until my brother got married with someone, I got married with someone, and now I live here. And for the first time in my life, house for me, it's not the place where my mom is, where my parents is. So, in a sense, now for me the house is not linked to a place, but it's linked to the people where the mom is. So now, my
mom is.
Yeah. So now I'm the mom. So that's why there is a house.
Yeah.
And absolutely not to make this about me, right? But
No.
I cannot go where my mom grew up. She grew up in Nigeria. I cannot go back there. So this is my mother's side. On my father's side, they are from Poland. I cannot go back to their place and say hey, Like my father grew up there. Like I can maybe physically go back there in Nigeria or in Poland, but I cannot say like, guys, give me back my house. This was my parents' house. And same for the place where I grew up, and I still feel like when my husband say like, "Are you home?" I know what he's talking about. And just saying that, as you say, like it's the word house is a floating thing, and we should not get too attached to like the physical house. In a sense, but we should always remember where we got from. Like I will never forget like from where I am, but I can have another house and still have in my heart the house where I'm from.
It does.
So it's interesting. I've been thinking, so we tend to use, I don't want to go too much into semantics, but we tend to use two words, home and house. And for me, there's a very distinctive difference. House, for me, is like a structure. And home is, it's more emotionally vested and more personal relationship. And my first language is Japanese. And in the Japanese, it's kind of interesting. You have a sort of a character that's imported from China. And it's called ie, or ka, or ya, depending on how you pronounce it. But it's basically the Chinese symbol. It's a roof, and underneath is a cattle. In China, it's pig actually. But that's what it means. The character of a house. But in the Japanese indigenous language, there's another word ie or no uchi. So if you just say, I live in a house with a like a blue roof, that's where you see the structure. But if you find, if you're like a 3-year-old, I can't find my home, that's the word you say, uchi ga wakaran, uchi. But uchi also means inside. So there's actually opposite of outside, which can connotate like exclusivity. So as a child, the worst thing you can be told is, you don't belong to our house. That's like the worst thing you can do. If you're really, really naughty, the parents will say, well, you don't belong to our house.
But what does it mean?
It
Because
means that
that's the other thing. Belonging, you also learn.
You're not inside, you're outside. You're excluded.
They're excluded.
I was going to say the same. House and a home.
Yes.
House as a structure. It's been very interesting because my family we went out of my home country 15 years ago.
Which is where?
Bulgaria. And my kids grew up in different places because of my husband's job. So my young one, he used to say that his home is in Hungary, where we were for 6 years, and he was 2 years old then. So the longest he lived there in his life.
Is it because of language, or is it language, or is it the structure of place, or
Home and house, or
Hungary, like the homeland? I'm not
Hungary,
thinking
you mean the country?
the country. Yeah, I know. Like I'm saying, is the homeland is the notion of homeland because of the language, or is it?
No,
It's not. It's actual.
Yeah, it's actual
structure.
Yeah, exactly. So if I ask my kids where are they from, they don't really know because they grew up in different places. But home is always going to be where mom is. Where your family is.
Where your mom is. And by the way, they're an Abrahamic family house. There's a mom, kind of. That's okay. I mean, it's a patriarchy, and it's okay. It's okay. That it's interesting that we have this notion of home is where mom is, and then we have this other notion of a house and belonging that is under this under this figure of Abraham.
Because I think mothers were our first house.
Our first house, yes. Yes. Literally. They're literally
So
our
that's
house.
That's so true.
Oh, yes, literally. It's in Arabic it's called rahim, which is grace.
It's also moon.
Exactly. Yeah. Rahim, it is like it is really the. I learned this from Mother Silvana. Mary, full of grace, when she was pregnant with Jesus. It's like because she's carrying him, so it's like a protection. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
So, two things. So, while I was sitting here, I think I counted all of the places where I lived, the dwellings, and I lost count after 25. So, I think there are a couple more, but things that ages me. But to have moved so often. So it's a lot about what you said about when I think about the most distinctive places. I think about like our dining room table and all the dinners and the friends and the family that we've had. And to me that is the home. But my first memory of house when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, I had a book, and it was in the shape of a house, and it was a children's book that I won at a raffle. And it was just pictures of houses from all different countries, and it was colorful, and I must have held on to it for a really long time and carried it around, but I think it was so intriguing and fascinating. It gave me a lot of my impetus for wanting to travel internationally, from looking at the way different houses all over the world are so different, but yet, as you said, they are the dwelling and the protection for each person.
Would you like?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
For me, house is like, as for me, I moved like 2-3 places. I am from India. And the place where I grew up was a military, it's called a camp. Camp area is basically military, army people. And very straight, very clean, But my heart breaks when I go back there. It's very different. It's not like, how we grew up. We were so protected, like, even at 10 o'clock at night, we used to play hide and seek. It's no more now, And that's the saddest part. And plus, we were 5 siblings, like whatever. I mean, within that small house, the 4 walls, like everything was done there, And, but now it's different. So, though I don't have my parents and like no one. And right now here, I stay alone. My family, my husband and son are in UK. But yet, for me, this is my second home. Because I spent 22 years here. So what happens is, people like you, when I meet, it's my home.
And that's thank you for that. And this for this Abrahamic family house that we're trying to. It's because it's called a house, right? We're trying to figure out, what it is as we're beginning to inhabit it, right? So it was built, it was imagined, it was dreamed up, it was built, and then people started to come, of all sorts of people, in offices and tourists and residents and rabbis and professors and all sorts of people, right? Came and students come and we're trying to figure out what it is, what makes this a house, right? And I want to again to talk about what happened 2 days ago. It was very interesting because, this house has different compartments, right? Like a house does. There is a public place. We had the living room, and then there were the bedrooms that were private.
Yes.
And then there is the living room where people come and they get together. There is the different parts of it. So there's something of that happening here, right? Something of actually one house. Of course, we talk about it. The house is a worship, and we're very careful about saying that these are very different houses. They're not all the same, right? There's a church and there's a synagogue and there's a mosque and then there's a forum. But I think it still has a notion of even a one house, because even houses have different parts, that there are borders that are very important. You know, one room does not make a house, does it? Right? I mean, and even for Noah, you know, it says like, go make different compartments with doors, with walls, separate people, otherwise, you know, it becomes a
It would have been a chaos.
chaos, it becomes a raft, you know, like everybody mixes together. So there's something similar.
Sorry, I was thinking that was something that became, although I myself didn't experience this, but during the COVID pandemic, because I'm a nurse, but I remember if I'm talking about a lot of my family, based in the UK and Scotland, they had these lockdowns and their work became part of their home, you know, because they had to work a lot of the time from home, and then it became that there was a lot of that, in a sense, kind of mental anguish because they couldn't separate work from home, because you had all these people that they just had, like my sister, for example, she had like what she called like her office in a box, because her office was in her sitting room, and then she was like, every time I was, you know, at the end of the day, I was looking there and all my work stuff is there, because they never got that connection. So then not only within the COVID period, but then they didn't have that home almost as a place of safety. There was no way in. Some people enjoy that they could work from home, but for some people it was very oppressive because they couldn't have that.
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
For me, what you're saying is very important, because I want to bring attention to precisely that. House as a thing that is structured, like as a building, not only as a home. We're talking about a home here, and that's important, right? But a house is like, I want to talk, the fact that it's a building with a structure, with walls, with doors, or has a shelter, or opens this way or that way. That part of it is just something that is important, you know, today, as a inside and an outside. So when we say that, when we say, you know, you say that work has a frame and you bring it at home, it kind of mixes, you know, it's kind of mixes. Some people work well with it, some people don't. It's important, right? Because if we are going to create, like if we have a project of, have something in mind, we want to create something new, better human relations, let's say, right? Peace, I don't know. Let's think. How do we house it? How do we structure it? It's like, it's not willy-nilly, right? Let's just build something, you know. We really have to think about the structure of it. It has to be structured, otherwise it's just free-floating, it doesn't work, right? So the architecture and the building of it and the design of it and the language of it, all of these things that we've talked about really, really matter, right? How I can serve as a vessel, right? How I can serve as a shelter. How I can serve as poetry and language, all of these things. If we have an agenda, right, and we want to kind of move human relations and human family or social, whatever it is, I don't want to say what it is, towards something, it really, the structure and the frame really matters. And of course, we have a filmmaker here, and you know, my friend Wendy, I became all of a sudden self-conscious because you know, as a director, I mean, you're thinking about frames all the time, all the time, right? It is Wendy, would you like to say something?
Sure, I actually had to, not about frames, but I had to get something off my chest when I was writing, and I think it's because being here as an expat and traveling the world, but I feel that my skin is a home. I did write about a home and with my family and feeling safe and in my mother's arms, but I think there's something movable about these bodies that we move through our days with. That can also be a home.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Our bodies.
Yeah, for skin.
Mm-hmm. You know, I do want to say something quickly about that, you know, and this can become a whole discussion. For me, that changed, and this is a personal thing, for me, that changed when I had a child. Before I had a child, yes, my body was my temple. Literally, here I am my center and I sit and I meditate. Absolutely, I'm at one with Adam and Eve. I'm not joking. No, I mean, I'm being facetious, but really, time disappears and, literally, my body could be my home, right?
I think Julian is part of your.
But it is that. We know each other. But then once you have something outside of yourself, right? It's interesting when you say that the person. It's not like you cannot be your own home anymore. You cannot be because you need this arc, something outside of yourself. You need because you have to protect somebody else outside of yourself. You cannot become your own center. I will have to come and learn from you. At least it has been an absolute shift and decentering of spatially and structurally and in terms of frame. So I will stop it here.
No, it's really interesting. But
Yeah.
I'm also a mother, but I would consider my children are extensions of my, but we are together.
You have calmer children, maybe.
Poor Julia.
No, but you're right. I think that one of my kids I found that is the extension of me, and my other one I'm like, not my house.
They're the center, they're the pillar, and then you have to move around it. Can I invite you to
Yeah. So what I wrote actually was like you said. So I consider a house where my family is. I just remember where I grew up, my father, my mother. Even though I grew up and I lived in Abu Dhabi my whole life, but we still change houses. And I can see every single house, the one I was born in till the one I am, it's still there. But it's mainly about the people in it. So it's the safety, it's where I imagine myself, it's a place where I get home and I don't feel like I need to look a certain way or dress a certain way or do it's like where you just yourself without thinking of anything and being protected with people that you know that you love and they love you and a safe place. So it was more of the people, a relationship. It's a place of a relationship. Like, for example, I work here, and it's called the Abrahamic family house. And since day one, it's something that I always felt like it is coming to work. I feel like okay, everyone since day one, before the opening, we come here. It's like a place of a house where it gathers group of people where they believe the same thing and also wants to gather people where they have common things, get together. It's about bringing people together. So, yeah.
It's also amazing, this place. I want to just use the occasion to say how many people from all over the world they come here and the encounters that happen in the forum are really truly extraordinary, right? The other day I actually did run into my second cousin from Shiraz. It's extraordinary, and I hear some words and hello, coffee, yes, you can go here. Where are you from? And then they end up being second. Like very, 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 very close. And then New York writes me and say, we saw your picture, and it's a really, really, really remarkable. I cannot think of another place in the world. That this would happen. So it's to be seen, like how this house will grow. It's like, I think it's beyond that, beyond. us.
It's unique, you know. This place is unique, and like I'm a teacher, so many people who have come here, they're just surprised, and they even can't imagine that there is a place like this in the world. And it is, I call it unique because I don't think anywhere, a place like this is there. And we are the luckiest people to be here.
Yes, please.
Well, it's interesting, as you said, did this activity evoke emotion? And I chose to look at Earth as home rather than, I could go from
You chose to look at
Earth as home was one of the prompts.
yeah, one of the, yes.
Being the Abrahamic family house, what we're trying to do here. So I started from a macro perspective, like a planetary perspective. And I thought, this is our home, all of ours, without division. We all have these physical houses that look pretty similar, that act similarly as family houses to our species, human and animal and otherwise. And then I thought about the planets and perhaps other species and what are their types of homes that is unknown to us. And we think that there's such division in the world, which is what the Abrahamic family house is about unity, that we're one humanity, we're one planet. And I thought we've made these constructs of the physical home with a roof and walls and where a core family lives, but they're constructs. And then I thought about ego and division of the houses. This religious house, this regional house, what we've constructed. And then I thought about division and lack and war. And then I thought, what about home insecurity, not having a house? You can't have a home. What does that mean? Lack of home and impertinence. Homeless people globally, wherever, like it's the same, no division of religion, region, it's the same. And then I came back to the micro, like I was in this like emotional stratosphere because of where we are right now and what you're doing in this place, this talk right now. And then I thought of my good fortune of having a house and a loving family, my identity, my family, irregardless of religion or region or whatnot, those are the same. If you're lucky to have a house and a family within that house, belonging and safety and love, permanence in the core. But I just thought we've made these constructs, and here we are in the Abrahamic house, and we're reconstructing what we might have done wrong in the division of the houses.
You know what is remarkable about what you say? It's so powerful because all of a sudden, we've been talking about a place and like the very specifically place and attachment to place. And the way you spoke, like going from macro, global, and all of a sudden it takes away this over-attachment. It takes it away, we really can be at home. Anywhere.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be here or here or here. It's really important because sometimes, we've been trained as though, we have to kind of navigate, it's the owning, right? Maybe it's the real estate thinking, I don't know, because the real estate is part of housing as well, that we have to be in this neighborhood or this city or this next center of civilization or it's that, there's that. And you know what, you just sort of, all of a sudden, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be, right? There's a kind of a balance in the world. You can be anywhere. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. I think that's